guys thinking about current events, very current events concerning what's known as West Memphis 3? So West Memphis is in Arkansas. In 1993, there were 3 8-year-old boys murdered. They were found submerged in creek water in a place called Robin Hood Hill in West Memphis. And they'd been brutalised, humiliated. They were hog-tied using shoelaces and perhaps something else, but definitely shoelaces. West Memphis being on the slave line of the pilot wheel, for anyone that's interested in that angle. And I don't know a lot about this case, but I know that there's been multiple millions of propaganda thrown toward Echols, especially from Hollywood. So sad, so disappointing, learning, who his supporters have been. Why, Johnny, why? I don't know why I'm less surprised about Rollins, but anyway. So these little boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and the West Memphis 3, so Echols, Miss Kelly, and Baldwin. And Miss Kelly confessed several times, about 6 times. And I'm not saying that a confession is evidence, and I'm not saying a confession can't be coerced either, particularly someone who probably was suffering some sort of genetic deficit and home life deficit. But I think it is gross exaggerations when people say that Miss Kelly is so mentally retarded that he could very easily have been manipulated. In 1994, those 3 were convicted, and Damien Echols was on death row, and he spent some time in solitary, and he's famous for the stories he tells of that time and for the cult following that he has. And a while ago, the West Memphis 3 took an Alford plea. So this was just before Echols was going to be executed. He'd been in prison, I think, for around 17 years. They were finally getting around to frying him. And all 3 were told, this involves all of you stating that you accept that, if you went in front of a jury, the state would have enough evidence to find you guilty. It's kind of that sort of thing, right? So they nearly are having to say, well, it's not that they've pled guilty. It's not quite like that, but it could be seen to boil down to that, really. And so to save Echols, that's what happened. And since then, he's had Hollywood cozying up to him. He openly practices his witchcraft. He basically, in my opinion, is still a Satanist, and people in Hollywood are fascinated with him, in my opinion, because they know or presume or think that he did it. So what's happening now is actually, well, there's a video, you can see an interview of Echols made when he thought, sorry, there's noise, it's quite distracting. When he thought, and I'm very unwell at the moment, sorry. When he thought that all the evidence of the case had been destroyed. He was, what a shame. He can't believe it, because he would have loved to have had DNA testing. For 8 years of being out, he wasn't saying anything. He gets word that maybe the evidence is destroyed, and suddenly he wants to do DNA testing on the evidence. I mean, I don't know. He always thinks he's the smartest person in the room, possibly, but I can kind of imagine a scenario. I don't know how this would work, or if it's possible, or if it could happen or did happen, but I'd like to imagine a scenario where he was set up and he's been told that it was all destroyed and he believed it, and it isn't. And so, he's been pushing, or rather his lawyers have been pushing for, now this new MVAC, well, it's not new, but MVAC testing, this type of DNA testing should be done on the evidence, particularly the shoelaces that were used to tie Stevie, Christopher and Michael, because whomever has their DNA on there would be seen to be the one to tie those boys up. Well, I think if Hobbs's DNA was there at all, there's possibly an explanation, but sadly water might have destroyed a lot of evidence. But I'd be very curious to see this MVAC DNA testing go right ahead, because I have a feeling Echols knows what's on those shoelaces, and I guess now enough time has gone by, you see, that he's had a 10-year window. Now if anything new comes up, legally he can't actually be taken to court and put in prison again for these crimes. So MVAC is, I think, where they're using water and suction to remove any DNA that might be left on something. It's a sort of, perhaps I think it was a technique that was being used in other ways and has now been developed to do this type of investigative work. I think this is the same lady. This has to be the same lady that is involved with the Cold Case Foundation, I think, who spoke to Chris McDonough on the interview room at one point, talking about the way she has kind of repurposed the technique for this type of investigation. Anyway, it's very interesting. I mean, look, don't come for me, Echols, but you make my skin crawl. And I don't know why this person is so lauded. He's got a cult following, I think, because the John Douglas mindfucker, this Hollywood production that's gone on around the case, and I feel like it does a great disservice to these three little boys. There's going to be a lot flying around, right? There's going to be a lot of arguments on the mean streets of YouTube, in comment sections and the like, where people are going to argue about witnesses and then witnesses recanting. For example, Echols being seen walking along a service road, all muddy, times that were given about where people were, what they were watching on telly, and things being disputed, and Hobbs being thrown under the bus again, the proverbial guilt bus. And I guess, who would be a good secondary option, even though Echols and Miss Kelly and Baldwin are such clear front runners as perpetrators. I guess stepfathers, are gonna come under scrutiny. They're not blood related. They are in another, they're in another man's home, kind of. They're in with a woman who's has a child. It's not this person's child, and we know that so many stories, I'm sure, from people that had such wonderful experiences with stepfathers who are so grateful those people were there in their life, and they feel like they are the father figure, and they call them father, and they've been everything that a father needed to be. And this, might be the majority of cases. Maybe a lot of cases, the situation with regards to the relationship, it's just very neutral. But, there are clearly cases that when there are step parents or, people just completely unrelated to the children, boyfriends, etc., introduced and let around children, and then often left unsupervised around these children. We all know of many cases, even in the last year, where these little children turn up dead in suitcases on the side of the road. In the case of Letitia Stalk, just discarding Gannon. In fact, I don't like calling her Letitia Stalk, Letitia Harden, discarding Gannon Stalk. There's another little boy found in a suitcase. Was that little Olsen boy? It happens. Children going missing from homes they should be safe in, but they're not blood relatives, and no one seems to be around protecting them. Look at the West children, Orrin and Orson West. Again, on that slave line. What happened to them? I have a theory, and not to divert, but I guess I've said my piece about Westminster Memphis 3, and that is, I just feel that those three, Echols, Miss Kelly and Baldwin, are guilty. And that evidence might actually prove it, but I'm not sure that there's going to be enough remaining that the evidence will even get a chance to show the world the truth. But with the Wests, if Orrin and Orson are alive, I feel that they may have been rehomed. I was going to present a video on this, which I haven't done yet. So here's a little bit about it. The situation with children being adopted from Russia into American households got so dire due to rehoming, due to abuse, due to sometimes children actually being flown back and discarded back in Russia by their adoptive parents, that Americans are no longer allowed to adopt from Russia. And rehoming the majority of the time is happening with children that have been adopted from overseas, and it just has not worked out for the adoptive parents. They do not like the child that they've adopted. For some reason, they think that these children that they're adopting are going to be perfectly balanced and just little angels, and not require dedicated, thoughtful care, parenting, other support from services where needed, such as mental health care, physical health care, extra educational support and tools. And these children adopted from all around the world, when people decide that they just want to go back to their little American life without these children, they rehome them. And these children are made to do things like attend adoption days. They're like these viewings, as if you're going into the RSPCA, into the animal welfare organisation, right? To go and look in cages and maybe meet some dogs, and maybe take your pet dog to go and meet the dog that you might be going to adopt. It's kind of like that. Yeah. So what happens is families can go along, and these children might, it could be a picnic day where they have games and they're all interacting and the kids are on display and trying just to put on their best. They might have a pageant where they walk down the middle of a community hall and are spoken about, and this is Julia. She's 13. She enjoys painting and would like a family where she can cook and learn to speak English and go to school. Well, this is Jeremiah, and he really wants to have brothers and sisters, and these poor kids are paraded up and down. And of course, many families there for these rehoming adoptions are genuine people who maybe have not been able to go through another adoption process because perhaps they don't have money. Perhaps they didn't have money to try IVF, or they just haven't been able to have a child of their own. Maybe they've tried other avenues and they've been turned down, and that this is what they're trying, and so they go to these rehoming adoption days and pick out a child. And sometimes these children, after they're rehomed and adopted, they're returned again, just rejected again. And sometimes, because it's so easy to get them, predators get their hands on these traumatized children. And if predators have the West boys, well, when all the furor comes out, number one, it's not like these boys are living a lovely life where they're out in public and meeting people and going to school. Maybe they've been denied any access to anything outside the home that they could be trapped in. So no one really knows it's them, knows to be even considering that the boys next door could be Orrin and Orson West. And the adoptive parents aren't going to come forward, are they, and say, hey, I have these children. Now, why would the Wests, Giselle and Jacqueline, be so sure that they're able to come out and say that these boys are just missing a year after I believe they've actually gone missing? Might be because they know the type of home that they went to. They know exactly where they went. And they know that these people aren't going to see the news and say something. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a risk. Maybe they never realised it would be worldwide. A worldwide watched situation. It's been over a year, so they went missing 21st of December, and a year, over a year ago. But I don't think they've been seen since Thanksgiving 2019. It's the last proof of life that anybody has, that we've been given. And why wouldn't the West family have come out with anything at all to show what they're accused of is wrong, right? That, they know that people can see there is no proof of existence of these boys after Thanksgiving 2019. And yet they've got nothing. Sure, now the police, I was going to say Broomsfield, in Bakersfield, have their phones. We all know that if you take a photo of maybe your child on your phone, you probably send it to someone, post it somewhere, Facebook, send it in an email. But the excuse that Jacqueline and Giselle have, that they can't show anything, just grab an image out from the cloud off an app, off a Facebook page, or out of an email, an email attachment, is because the cops got their phones. Yeah. So it's my belief that Jacqueline and Giselle know exactly what happened to Orrin and Orson, and that whenever it happened and whatever it was a long time ago. Why Bakersfield police seem to be doing nothing about this, I don't know. It's just like I can only surmise that Candace Wells knows exactly what happened to Summer. Anyway, I've run out of time with what I've got as memory on my phone, so see you later. Sorry, this wasn't very good. It's just interesting what's happening now with the West Memphis 3, the DNA, and the Satanist that is Damien Echols.